right, everyone. Good afternoon. I am extremely excited today. It is February 20th, 2025. Welcome to Scouching Live. I am joined today by the Athletic / New York Times writer and prospect aficionado, Scott Wheeler, with his brand new microphone. Scott, how are you today? How are things? What's going on? Having a good
Uh,
Thursday?
Me and my microphone are good. I'm in the process of being audited by the Canadian government, so
Oh, no.
that
Oh,
was
no.
that was my morning. I got to basically resubmit my taxes for 2022 and 2023. They want me to verify all of my
Oh,
expenses and all that. And in this industry, it's a pretty complicated thing with all of the travel that we do and the
yeah.
various expenses that we have. And my taxes aren't your typical tax forms. So
Right.
yeah, it's that was my morning, and now we're moving on, and we're talking some 2025 NHL draft here.
That sucks. You've been deducting too much from your Go Train trips or something. I know a buddy of mine got nailed for that a couple of years ago. They audited him because they thought he was deducting too much from his Go Train trips. I don't know, but that
No,
sucks.
I think it's more just like receipts and that kind of thing. I gotta, I
Right.
got, I gotta prove it.
Yeah. Well,
It's all right. We're on track.
yeah.
We've got it sorted. We'll we'll
Yeah.
we'll bounce back.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not a tax cheat.
No,
I think
no,
you and the Canadian government will figure it out.
we'll be all right.
Yeah, we'll be all right. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the tax laws here in Canada. We're here to talk 2025 draft. Before we get to that, though, tonight is the final of the Four Nations Face-Off. Scott, how invested are you in this? How much have you seen? What are your thoughts so far? And where are we going tonight? What's the story for today?
Well, I play hockey on Wednesday nights, so that very first game, I only caught the start and the tail end of it. But other than that, I've seen the remainder of the tournament. I've seen the rest of the games in completion. It's been awesome. It's been awesome. I I don't want to sort of pat myself on the back, but I felt coming. I wasn't as down on it, I'll say, as
Hmm.
most. I felt coming in that this once the puck dropped, that this thing was going to be better than people thought. That people were going to get more engaged than they were expecting to. I mean, we all had it, but anytime we wrote about it at the Athletic, it was dozens of comments and tweets and messages saying, "I don't care about this thing. I'm not going to have any interest in this thing." And now, where have all those people gone? Right? Like it's all
Oh yeah.
anybody's been talking about for the last 2 weeks, and it's been great. It's the sort of cliche talking point these days, but this is some of the highest level hockey that has ever been played. So that in and of itself is exciting. I normally flip on the Leafs games, and I'm not as much looking forward to turning on the game on Saturday night and watching Pontus Holmberg and David Kampf. And it's going to be an adjustment, I think, for NHL
Yeah.
fans that have been tuned into these games to then go back to watching the third and fourth line players on their NHL clubs. But no, it's been great. It's got me fired up about the Olympics. It's got me fired up about a potential true best on best World Cup 2 years after that in 2028. Uh, I was excited when I read that they're actually planning for that World Cup of having some kind of qualification format.
Oh, okay.
There's going to be some kind of tournament, so they're not just going to pick 8 teams, which I think could be fun to see Germany and Slovakia and Switzerland and those countries sort of compete for the final 2 or 3 spots. I would presume if Russia's participating that the top 5 or 6 teams will be taken care of, and that any kind of play-in tournament will just be for Germany and Slovakia and
Right.
Switzerland and that kind of thing. But I think that even a sort of sub tournament of that quality that includes Leon Draisaitl and Tim Stützle and Moritz Seider and JJ Peterka and Lucas Reichel and Roman Yossi, who will still be kicking around, and
Hmm.
Simon Nemec and Juraj Slavkovsky and all those young Dalibor Dvorsky, potentially all of uh, those young Slovaks. So I'm excited that there's a set calendar now. I think Gary Bettman and the NHL really dropped the ball on this over the last decade, and I'm glad that they're finally sort of coming to their senses here, and that it's played out the way that it has, because I think it's been great, and I think tonight is going to be awesome. And
Yeah.
I'm as excited for the game tonight as I have been for any non-World Juniors game. The World Juniors are obviously a little bit higher on my priority list, but outside of the World Juniors and maybe a gold medal game at U18 Worlds, like I can't remember the last time I tuned into the NHL product as excited as I am for tonight's game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right with you. I kind of went in as like a bit of a know nothing on this. I kind of was like, well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, obviously, it's hard to with the way that the world of hockey is these days. Like I think it's hard to screw up having the best play the best, and especially with how good these teams have been. I mean, even Finland, people kind of wrote them off, but they made some of it pretty interesting. They, for a split second there against Canada, it was looking
Yeah.
like maybe we were going to get something pretty interesting come out of that game. But so it's been a great experience. I'm really pleased to hear about the qualification for the World Cup, if that's potentially a thing in a few years, because I really am a big believer in like that's a pretty underserved but underrated sort of world of hockey, is like these teams that try to play in to these sort of top division tournaments, because it really does matter for them. These types of things, those Division 1A tournaments and all that stuff. Like I watch them every time as much as I can, because those guys want the chance to go to the World Juniors, right? Like I went to the relegation game against Germany and Kazakhstan. I think that's one of the most underrated games at the World Juniors every year, because those guys want to stay in the tournament. They don't want to go and have to play in Japan next year or in Slovenia or something. They want to be in Minnesota playing in front of thousands of people. And so when you see a team like Kazakhstan come close, come real close and just not pull through, it was really exciting. So yeah, really happy to see that. I'm really excited about it. And yeah, I think I agree. Like I think the last time I've been this excited about best on best, maybe Vancouver,
Yeah.
almost 15 years ago, which is actually, it was 15 years ago, which is just
15
crazy
years
to
ago,
think about.
February 28th.
Yeah,
I know,
literally
because
almost 15 years ago.
yeah, my birthday is February 28th, and that gold medal goal, the golden goal from Crosby, was on my birthday. So, yeah, we're coming up on almost exactly 15 years here. The other thing that's been interesting about this, and I don't want to, we don't need to hang on it too
Yeah.
long, but the other thing that's been interesting about this is the measuring stick for me, just from a player evaluation standpoint, of some of the second tier guys. Like we know what Adam Fox is. We know what Austin Matthews is. We know what Connor McDavid is. We know what Nathan McKinnon is. But it's kind of those second tier stars that have been interesting to see them against, not just against each other, but on the same roster as well. Like I think this tournament has illuminated, for example, that Braden Point is a better and maybe even much better hockey player than Mitch Marner. And that there's a divide even amongst stars between a Braden Point and a Mitch Marner, or a Sam Reinhart and a Mitch Marner. Like there's just, I think there's a quality difference there, and there has been in these games between some of those second tier stars that starts to sort of distinguish them in your mind. And you can see that in a 7-game playoff series, and there are other sort of barometers in the NHL that allow you to measure those guys against each other. But it's been nice to see, and I'm not talking about Cale Makar or Sidney Crosby, right, or those types, but it's been nice to see those middle of the lineup guys in this sort of environment. Like Jack Eichel is a better player.
Oh yeah,
Marner.
dude.
Like that's been, how clear has that been over the last 2 weeks, right? So those little comparisons, I think, have been illuminating for me. There's been some divisions between some of those guys for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like NHL playoff games on steroids almost, where it's like you really, in the playoffs in the NHL, you generally see different player types and different guys sort of rise to the occasion for different reasons. And then especially in that Canada-US game, you saw the importance of some of those guys, those, like you mentioned, those guys a little bit more down the lineup who are still elite players in their own right, and how they sort of adapt and play when things are like that.
Mm-hmm.
And guys like Jack Eichel do stick up and stick out, I should say. But anyway, really, really good stuff. It's been a lot of fun. But we can get into the draft here. It's we're about halfway through the draft season, just over halfway, and we're getting there every day. That just seems to melt away quicker. So I sent you where I'm at with things this morning, and obviously Scott's rankings, they're in the chat. I just posted them earlier. So if you haven't seen them, you can open them up and check them out. I'll turn it over to you. Where do you want to start? Because I know in the past when you've been on the show, I'm usually in the driver's seat. So I'm gonna give you the keys to get started here. Where do you want to go? What do you want to put out there? What's on your mind?
There were a few that jumped out at me. The first one, and maybe the biggest name, so we'll start there, was Caleb Desnoyers. And I think I know exactly what you're going to say about Caleb Desnoyers in terms of why you have him in sort of more the middle of the first round rather than the top of the first round. Caleb was a guy who, until this most recent ranking, I had kind of around 10, kind of in that 9 to 12 range. I've now moved him up into that sort of 5 to 7 range. there are NHL clubs that I've spoken with who believe he's a top 4 guy. There are NHL clubs who believe he's better than Porter Martone or he's better than James Haggins. Uh, Teams I know are in love with this kid. Certainly from a production standpoint, he's doing what Anthony Mantha and Pierre-Luc Dubois and the top young players, Nico Hischier, the top young players that have been drafted near the top of the NHL draft out of the queue. He's had a very comparable season to them. He's been one of the best players on one of the best teams in the CHL. He might be the last top prospect playing this year if they go to the Memorial Cup. Which I think could be a benefit to him if he's playing in big games in a QMJHL final or in a Memorial Cup, and he's kind of the last viewing for some teams before their amateur scouting meetings. And the way that I've started come around in terms of moving him from that 10 to 12 range to that sort of 5 to 7, 8 range for me, and I'm not quite there with clubs that have him top 4. But outside of for me with Caleb, outside of maybe a lack of high-end pace. Outside of that, I think he's got all the pieces of the puzzle. He's a 6'1.5" center. He's an excellent, committed two-way player. And the skill piece has been there more and more in my viewings than I expected it would. I came out of last year's U18 Worlds in Finland a little down on him. I thought he couldn't hang down the middle as a top 3 center for Team Canada. Now, he was an underager on that U18 team, but they barely played him in the games that mattered most, and it just became basically Jet Luchenko and Cole Baudouin's team down the middle. And coming out of that, I wondered about the skill. Like, did he have it in him to put up 100, 110, 120 points in the QMJHL? And that's exactly now what he's done. And in watching their games, I think he's doing it with a ton of smarts on the puck. I think he's doing it with some legit puck skill. He's made some highlight reel plays this year. So that's what elevated him for me. Is I don't just think he's going to be a good top 9 center at this point. I think you're probably looking at a legitimate 2C. Again, not sure the pace will allow him to play higher than a lineup than that. Like, I think there is a little bit of a ceiling there in terms of what is he offensively without the true high-end pace. He's probably, I don't know, a 55, 60 point center who's a two-way winning type that a coach can really trust. But that's a very valuable player. Like, that kind of player makes $7-8 million in the NHL. So, and is a player that you'd sooner take, I think, in that top 10 range than where you have him, which is kind of around 20. So curious why. I understand not being in that sort of 5 to 7 range on him, but I'm curious why he's not in that sort of 10 to 12 range that I previously had him.
Right. So I think with him, I mean, he's one of those guys where the way people talk about him, and now you're bringing up what teams are thinking about him. He's one of these guys where I probably have seen more of him in the last 2 months than a lot of other players, probably, just not for data purposes, but just in general. And I still just have a really hard time. Like, I think everything you're saying with regards to his play style is very accurate. Like, I do think if this were find the smartest players, like on, probably people who can see and understand the game the best, he's probably up there. But like, you're using the word pace a lot. And I think that is arguably one of the most important things you need in the NHL. And I do see not Carbonneau. I see Desnoyers as a very smart, capable sort of third line guy in the NHL. I think that is plain as day to see. Like, I agree. You throw him over the boards, you know what you're getting. He's smart, positionally supportive. He can get physical if he needs to. But I do wonder, if he isn't just a more give and go type playmaking sort of 200-foot center, and is he gonna get the opportunity and the puck touches in the NHL to really, get the reps that he needs, right? Like, I still think the level of competition in the QMJHL is a little soft. And when I watch him, and like in reference to the Q specifically, like, I have Bill Zonin and Justin Carbonneau ahead of him. And I see Justin Carbonneau, and I remember you really talking about him really positively earlier in the year.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
And I see the last game I did of him, he was amazing, but only in a way that I think works better for the NHL with regards to, like, you leave him as an offensive guy, but he has the power and the confidence, and he was making some high end really creative playmaking attempts that like sometimes worked and sometimes didn't, but you see a guy there where you're like, there's something very, very interesting about this player that's worth betting on. And with Zonin, I, you mentioned it in your write up on him too. Like when I watch Bill Zonin, I go, this is the type of third line center that I would really like, right? Like also very smart, but I think when I watch him, a lot of the plays that he makes are done at a quicker pace of play. I think he's
Definitely.
faster. I think he's more physical and more of a pressure applicator. And I think with the speed of the NHL, like the thing is like the speed of the NHL is a massive, massive jump from pretty much everywhere else. So with Desnoyers, I see why people like him. I mean, I see why some NHL teams might look at him relative to like a James Haggins. And if you have any doubt about a guy like James Haggins, I might be able to see why. But I also feel like I wouldn't put my eggs in Caleb Desnoyers instead. It's more to me also like in the top end of this draft. I think there are a lot of players that could be very positively impactful, good NHL players. Like I know the whole class as a whole is not amazing, but at the very top, I think the top 8 or 9 guys I think are really, really interesting. And then it gets very interesting with who goes where and what, because I think they'll all sort of fill that middle six role in some way here and there. So with Desnoyers, I just think he's one of a pack more than anything, rather than this like supremely high end guy. I mean, if I see him as a third line guy, I'm probably not super. I'm not jumping at the chance to draft a guy that probably will be a third liner at the 5th overall pick, right? So to me, it's just a question of that pace of play that he has translating into whatever it is people think he's going to be. Like I get that he's smart, but generally like you don't see that, like who is a low pace center in the NHL that kind of you can look at and go, I would have taken that guy 5th overall, right? Like I don't know who I would go to, but I can think of plenty of third line guys where I'm like, yep, you throw them over the boards, they can receive passes, they can dish the puck, they can go to the net, they're physical, they play. But like you said, like a 50 point, 45, 50, 55 point guy, is that a top 5 pick to me? And I'm not so sure I'm there.
Yeah, the players that I go to when and this is just off the top of my head right now, I haven't actually thought all that hard about a player comp for him, but just in hearing you describe him and sort of ask that question, the first name that I went to was actually a former 5th overall pick who unfortunately was undone by injuries in Gabe Vilardi. Gabe, I think Gabe has kind of become the 40 to 50 point guy rather than the 50 to 60 point guy. But Vilardi is one of those guys that I think, had it not been for the back injury, could have been more than that, and is kind of a similar in makeup, similar in smart, similar in pace of play. There are probably some others. Like, could he be, if he adds some muscle, could he be Joel Eriksson-Ek? Like I think that's sort of another player that you would hone in on, that type at least. Now Eriksson-Ek's a heavy, heavy man.
Mhm.
But those, yeah, Eriksson-Ek, Vilardi, those are the kind of players that I'm thinking about. And in a like Eriksson-Ek, for example, in a redraft, he's a top 10 pick in that class, right? So that, yeah, I don't know. It's a fair conversation. I think in this draft he fits into that range, that top 10 range for me, because I think he's got a chance to be a second line center rather than a third line center. And B, the production has got to a level now where I can feel comfortable that even if it's not high end pace, that, I mean, he's produced, like, as I mentioned off the top, like he's producing like Nico did and like Pierre-Luc Dubois did, and is a dominant two-way player at that level. Now team has a little bit to do with that. He plays with very good players. That Moncton team is loaded.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of factors at play there, but he's been better than the players on that loaded team, and is playing 24 minutes a night when it matters in games, and doing it as a draft eligible. And I think he's going to do it in the playoffs, and he's going to do it at the Memorial Cup potentially. And if it just
Right.
sort of adds up and keeps adding up, I think by the end of the year, it's going to be hard to be confident, if you will, that there are 10, 12, 15 better players than him in the draft.
Right. I mean, yeah, for me, it's like if he's gonna, it's getting to the point for me where it's like if he's just gonna be a guy that goes 4th, 5th, or 6th overall, like I can't commit to that. Like I don't think you could convince me to do that. So
I
whether
think
I
he,
have him.
I think barring injury or
Yeah.
some steep drop off in his play, I think that's the range he's going in
So
based off the
whether so
conversations
whether
I've
so
had.
whether I have him at 8th or 20th, like it almost doesn't matter because it's like
Yeah.
I just see a limited guy there. Like I agree kind of with the Joel Eriksson kind of thing. Like I think he could get there, but I'm looking at the 2015 draft class, and there's a lot of guys on here that I would have on my team over Joel Eriksson. But regardless, at the end of the day, like I don't know, I like Caleb Desnoyers, and the data work that I've done on him is not negative. It's just a matter of projection and where he's going to end up in the NHL, where I kind of go, would I rather take a bet on someone outside of sort of that box that he's kind of in, and see what I can do with that player, because I feel like there might be some better swings to take. But anyway, well, it almost
I,
like probably doesn't matter, right?
this is not where I'm at on him, but it's worth, like, I've had people toss around like Jonathan Taves and that kind of conversation to me over text over the last couple of months.
And to me, I just go, okay, like I guess, I don't see that, but I guess, like we'll see. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But we should probably move on. The other one, I mean, obviously this one's definitely topical since you just put an article out about Kaanan Hes. So that dropped literally in the last hour, I believe. So give me your thoughts on Hes, maybe an AI summary of your article so people can go read it. Because I don't have Hes ranked right now, and
Yeah.
I'm curious about what what especially with your experience, where are you at?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot. I should start there. I've seen Kaanan play a ton over the last 3 years. Barrie is the closest rink to me. Barrie, Oshawa, and Brampton, and obviously previously Mississauga are the three closest rinks to me. They're the three rinks I'm in the most often. I'll see Barrie in Barrie. I'll often see Barrie in Oshawa and in Brampton because they play those teams so much. And I saw him at U18 Worlds, obviously in Finland, and I've seen him at the OHL Top Prospects game and the CHL USA Prospects. Like, I've probably got live viewings. Forgetting the tape, I've probably got 40 live viewings on Kaanan. And what has really emerged with Kaanan for me, and I'll get to the story and sort of what some of the people I spoke to had to say about him, but what has really emerged for Kaanan with me is, I think after, and I want to talk about Radim Mrtka, who I believe is the second best prospect in this draft, and we'll get to him. But I think after Schaefer and then a divide, and then Mrtka and then a divide, I think once you get into that third tier of defensemen, that Kaanan is among the D who has the clearest profile. Like, I have no idea what Logan Hensler is going to be in the NHL. I don't even 100%. Know if Logan Hensler knows what kind of player Logan Hensler is. Jackson Smith, I still think, is figuring out his identity and isn't sure whether he's a two-way big, strong kid or whether he's that bold offensive type that tries to take over games. And really, this is because it's a very weak draft on defense. I always come back to Kaanan of teams will know exactly what they're getting when they pick him. There's an identifiable role for Kaanan Hes in the NHL. And despite the fact that he's been very productive this year, that he's one of the most productive offensive defensemen in the OHL this year, that he's second among OHLD eligible for this draft in scoring behind Cam Reed, that he's going to score 20 goals, which is a very rare thing for a draft eligible defenseman in the OHL. He's been very successful running one of their 2 power plays in Barrie. That's not even the part of his game that I think teams look at and say, this is projectable, this is the player type. I don't think he's going to be a power play guy in the NHL, but with Kaanan, he's so strong, he's so physical. The skating has come along. The skating used to be a bit of, it never lacked power, but it was a bit of a concern just in terms of technique. And you still see it a little bit. He's got the arm sway and his legs kick out, and he doesn't maybe look like the most controlled skater on the ice, though I know he's worked very hard at it with his skating coach, Paul Matheson, who I spoke to for the story. But with Kaanan, I think that assuredness of his game, the confidence and energy and physicality that he plays with, I think it translates really well. He defends at a very high level. I thought he was the best defender on the U18 team in Finland at U18 Worlds. He entered that tournament as a 5-7 guy for them and finished it killing a ton of plays, out for the last 3 minutes of the gold medal game, killing plays, locking down James Haggins and company and Cole Eiserman and company in man-to-man coverage on a biggest stage he's ever played at. I think he's learned to rein in the discipline and the penalty taking, which was a concern and still is a bit of a concern for me. But I think the discipline will come. And then just the physical presence, his ability to defend, a lot to like there. And I think the puck play and the IQ piece, which were the two questions coming into this, everybody knew he could move pucks and he was physical and he was going to sort of project as a physical type, kind of a Jaden Struble type or better. But I think he's shown more this season in terms of making better decisions on the puck, the head for the game, spacing, timing, closeouts, when to step up and deliver that big hit, when to angle guys and play with his stick and stick on puck and all of that. So just over the course of this year, I've just been really, really impressed with him. He plays in all situations on a deep team that has Tristan Bertucci and Bo Akey, two of the better defensemen in the OHL. I think on many nights, he's their number one defenseman and their best defenseman. And I think at the end of the day, even if he's not a power play guy, he's going to be a top six defenseman who has a long, long career. He's got the physical attributes, and the puck play and the IQ piece and the decision-making piece has come along far enough and fast enough that I think he's going to continue to make progress there and sort of emerge as a really solid, kind of unique throwback type, rigid NHL defenseman.
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, it's similar to Desnoyers, where it's like I feel like I'm a little bit on an island by myself, and I just have to keep going back and watching more and more of these guys because, like with Aitchison, he plays a ton, so the sample size increases for me real fast, and pretty much across the board, the results are just not good. Like I get that he is without a doubt. Like I agree with you in terms of an NHL coach will play him. An NHL team will draft him in the first round and they will develop him and yeah, they'll play him, right? Like he's physical, he's mean, he's nasty, he's a guy that plays the way, that the NHL is for sure. But when I watch him, I see a guy who just does not play the actual game, the way that I would want my guys to play. Like like every single metric that I have, except for causing defensive zone cycle turnovers, is very negative. Like he is not a great distributor of the puck offensively on the rush. He is getting filled in possession wise. He's a guy who, to me, like the defensive style that he plays, I just don't think is very conducive to the NHL as it is now, where he's a guy who has pretty limited defensive involvement on the rush, and he'll relinquish control across blue lines and then sort of get in. Like the number of times I've seen him allow a defensive zone entry, allow a shot on net, and then slash a guy in the foot or shove him after the whistle. It's like I get that there is a side of people in the NHL, or there's a side of the game where people go, that's a good thing. But to me, it's not. Like I see a guy where I go, again, it's like if he's going to be drafted at 15th overall, like is that to me the best option there based on what I've seen? And it's like I know he's strong as an ox. He is physical. He is a guy who just plays that NHL style, but to what end, right? Like like he is. I mean, I'm gonna keep going back to him because I want to be absolutely sure before I totally leave him off my list. But I keep going back to him, and every single game I've seen, it's the same sort of pattern where I don't think there's a defenseman out there who ices the puck more than he does. I don't think there's a defenseman out there, at least in the OHL, that relinquishes as much control and like he loses a lot of interactions too. Like he'll try to get involved, but I feel like he comes out on the wrong side. And so for me, like I just look at him and I go, there's a reputation here, but I don't think the reputation quite lines up to reality. But I have been wrong before, right? Like I have been incorrect before, but when I see him, and especially when I do my work, I generally look against when he plays against the best teams out there because the low end of the OHL is just not. It's almost like doesn't matter. So for me, I watch him play, and especially relative to a guy like Radim Mrtka, who we're going to talk about after this. I just see with him and Jackson Smith and a couple of other guys, I see so much more in terms of tools and and that patience and smarts and like for a guy who's reputed as this really physical, super heavy hitting guy, I don't track him doing that many individual hits in a game, like at least not during play.
That's
It's he,
shocking to me.
I know, but it seems from my experience like I'm just not seeing what other people are, but I see a guy I don't know, I just see a guy where the results haven't been there, and I find it really hard to take a player who doesn't have the results in so many areas and then project them to the NHL, and it's going to figure itself out, right? So anyway, I'll throw it back to you because he's one where I just have been on an island, I think, relative to the rest of the world.
I'm curious, where did you have Stian Solberg last year? Because I think that's
Uh,
a very similar comp, and that Stolberg went what did he go 19th or 21st,
I
something
had
like that.
him. I had him late first, but I felt that the skating ability with Solberg and his ability to rush the puck and the shot quality with him was better. He was playing tougher competition. I think even though Norway's not like amazing, it's
No, it's
still
a fine
professional
pro league. Yeah.
it's still a pro league and they're grown men, and he was definitely registering more in terms of hits for me, but I don't know. I did have him late first round, but I also still feel like there were better options in the draft than where Anaheim took him.
Yeah. Yeah, see, I've seen some of the things you're talking about, having not seen, like I've seen them over and over and over again. The killing plays, the neutral zone, the rush defense, the physicality and winning battles. I've seen that live in buildings, like games where he's just owned his ice and been sure of himself and commanded out there, not just defensively, but increasingly in what I've been looking for out of him this year offensively in terms of making plays, beating that first layer of pressure. He's not the ultra cerebral sort of thinker of the game, but he plays on instinct. He attacks off the line. I've seen him beat guys one-on-one. I've seen him rip pucks past goalies. I've seen him attack into the slot, take space. There's been a lot of positives for me, honestly, in him. I think part of what you've seen in terms of not winning some of those engagements and that kind of thing, I think part of that is a proxy of how much he plays, the minutes he's playing, and the team he plays on. Despite the fact that that Barrie team wants to win an OHL title this year and is looking to contend, I think they, as a team, defend extremely poorly and play with, frankly, pretty awful structure. I think Brampton's that same way, despite also having a ton of talent. So I think there's a little bit of that is a part of it. Like, I don't think he's necessarily playing in the best situation or within the best structure, and I think he can wander and stray from that at times. But I certainly haven't seen him giving off the line and giving freebies to guys, at least certainly not consistently.
I mean, I'll go again between now and the end of the year. I'll be going back over and over again because it's something that I definitely want to be sure about. But the last thing I'll say is also like his age. Like, he's a guy who,
Yeah,
if he is in Barrie and it is as bad as you say it is, like, I agree. I think they don't really play a very competitive style of hockey, and that might factor into it as well. But he's going to stay there, and then he's going to be jumping into the AHL, right? So I don't know. He's just a big question mark for me, and it's almost like to the point where, is there ever going to be a realistic situation similar to Desnoyers in the NHL draft where he's the number one guy left on my list? And I just I just don't think that's going to happen. So, because I don't know. I feel like there are also other more physically punishing guys, like a guy like a Jackson Smith, where I'm like, I think that the footwork and the skating ability combined with the physicality he has long term, I think will project a lot better than I think what I've seen out of Aitchison. But
after Schaefer, Smith, and Mrtka, who are I don't have your list in front of me anymore, but who are some of the D that you'd be confident in saying are better D prospects than Kaanan?
Defensively speaking, I would probably put, like, I think a Blake Fiddler has a lot of really good defensive projectable tools.
Yeah, they're in the same range for me.
Yeah, I mean, I also just don't think there's a whole lot of defensemen who are like that good at defending. I do like the instincts and the skating ability and the intent behind a lot of what Quinn Beauchene does defensively. I mean, I know that, like, obviously that sounds ridiculous, but I see a guy in Beauchene where I'm like, yeah, he's not as big as Aitchison, he's not as physical, he's not blah blah blah, but the the overall involvement and the ability to monitor gaps and the ability to sort of stay tight and close things out and time stick checks really well. Like he's just a very smart and effective player who it's more that I see him as not a guy that I draft where I have him ranked, but if he's a 5th round draft pick or a 4th round draft pick, I am very excited about that relative to say taking Aitchison at 15 and then getting someone else later on, right? Like it's just a matter of value to me. So I also, yeah, and I also just don't know how many legitimately good defending players there are in this draft, honestly, in terms of
I like the
defensemen.
way Quinn defends, but like to me, it's as a NHL prospect, it's not even close. Like I think in terms of ceiling, in terms of what they might become, like I think ultimately Quinn is absolute best case scenario is a third pairing guy who gives you nothing, like very little with the puck. So I don't know. I would have a tough time wrapping my head around someone like Quinn or and now Quinn's not in a great situation in Guelph either, so that also plays into it. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know. It's that those ones are tricky. That those sort of side by sides are tricky for me because like Quinn, I see Ben Danford in Quinn, and I thought Ben was taken too high and is ultimately going to be a third pairing defenseman in the NHL. Like I think there's a line to draw between Beauchene and Danford that way, and I think Kayshawn's got a chance to be a much better pro player than those two, for example.
All right. Well, I'll have to go. I'll keep going on him, and we'll see where we end up. But anyway,
The playoffs will be important for him too. Like,
I mean,
he's
yeah, I mean, I can't disagree. Like, I understand that that's the style of play that he brings. It's just in terms of actual, like, I don't know. It's a matter of like results and like a matter of the aggregate results of what's going on. And I think it's a very small portion of the game itself where overall, like the impact on the game for him, at least in my experience, has been generally a lot less involved and a lot more limited. But we can move on, and I think the other guy you wanted to bring up that you're a huge fan of is Radim Mrtka.
yeah.
So that's a guy that I saw again this morning. I knew we were going to talk about him today. So you have him a little higher than I have him. I have him in the mid teens. You have him at 9, I believe. Top 10 at least.
I think eight actually.
Right. So Murtka's come over to play in Seattle. He's obviously been a point a game guy, really productive. What do you see in Murtka that puts you? I think you're the highest person out there on him out there, but I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure you are.
I just think I have not other than Matthew Schaefer, I haven't watched a better, higher ceiling defenseman in this draft. And I was very impressed with him through his international play in the spring and into the summer. I thought he should have at least had a strong case to make the Czech World Junior team as an underager. And despite the first few months of his season not going the way that many expected they would, like there were people who thought he was going to have a sort of David Jiricek level season in Czechia this season at the pro level, and that just didn't materialize for him. Some of that was just usage, some of that was coaching, not getting opportunities, some of that was him sort of still figuring it out. But since coming over to Seattle, he has looked not just like a good prospect to me, but he has looked like a star prospect to me and one of the best players immediately, basically one of the best defensemen immediately in the WHL. So I've been blown away. Obviously, the size skating piece is in and of itself gives him a high offensive and certainly defensive ceiling. But I think if you look back at the big rangy elite skaters that we've had in the draft, and there's been a couple of direct parallels over the last couple of drafts, like I'm higher on him than I was on Dmitry Simashev, who went 6th overall to Arizona, now Utah, obviously. I'm not sure I was higher on Anton Salayev last year than I am on Mrtka. Certainly, I think he's got more play to, like, in terms of his puck game. I think it's higher end at this age than it was for Salayev and for Simashev. He's got the skating, he's got the defending, but it's the thing that's blown me away. And I've spoken with Bill LaForge and Matt Audette, the head coach and general manager in Seattle, about him multiple times over the last month to make sure that I'm not going crazy. The thing that's blown me away is just his poise on the puck. Like he's just seeing right through guys. He's evading pressure. That is extremely rare. Simon Edvinsson had some of that. Obviously, Rasmus Dahlin had that on an entirely different stratosphere.
Right.
But in terms of like big guys who can actually see it and process it and aren't making that first pass to the first available stick that they see open, Mrtka has blown me away in that regard in Seattle. And every time I've watched him over the last couple of months since he arrived, he's been better and better and better and better. And he's just dominating at that level with his length and skating and mobility. But it's the poise that has elevated him from the sort of teens, the middle of the first round on my list to like a clear top 10 guy for me at this point. Like, I think there's reason to be very excited about what he might become with that poise on the puck, that cerebral quality on top of the skating and the length.
Yeah, I think in general, I agree. Like, I think everything you're talking about with Mrtka is something that I also would put money behind. Like, if you and I were on a scouting team together and it was 8th or 9th overall, and, I would have guys that I probably would be pushing for, but, I think there is definitely a very, very good case that Mrtka becomes, at the very least, like a very useful defensive defenseman in the NHL. Like, you compared him to Simishev, and I never really thought about it that way, but I do like Simishev. I remember liking Simishev more than what I've seen out of Mrtka, but I do think Mrtka brings a little bit of a different package of abilities than Simishev did. Like, it's a little bit more, like you said, like poised and calculated in a way. And I think with Mrtka, that is valuable. Um, and so I guess it just comes down to a matter of like what you value in a player and what puts a player above a certain other player for whatever reason, right? Like, I think you and I working together, we could have a good discussion about the value of a player like Mrtka in the NHL. And I think I could see myself relenting and going, you know what? Yeah, there are some guys that I like that I think are a little riskier and have maybe a little bit more of an impactful offensive upside than Mrtka probably does. Like, I look at Mrtka's point production and the results that I see in his games that I do and everything, and I don't see much of an offensive player there at the end of the day. I think that he's a guy who definitely brings his best tools and traits, moving the puck and skating defensively and timing things and closing gaps and just playing that responsible, calm defensive style without, like, he's huge, but he's not just going for the physical play all the time. Like, he uses his reach well. Like, there's a lot of things that I think he does very, very well. And so for me, like, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Desnoyers, where I think he's part of a group that there's a whole bunch of different players who bring different individual aspects at a very, very high level that I think all have a legitimate reason to be in that late top 10 to middle teens range. I think with Mrtka, there's definitely a world for me where I would be taking him around where you have him. But I do think there are other players where I'm like, well, is he gonna be a dependable 200-foot defensive leaning defenseman in the NHL? And what is that worth in the draft, right? Like, over, some other options that could you find a guy that is not as good a bet, but in 5 years, you think you might get something really valuable out of him that you could get later in the draft, whereas there might be some really, really special talent that you could get up front, right? Like, I look at him and then, like, I have Jackson Smith higher than him, but I do think there is more risk with Smith. But I also think that Smith is not quite what he's portrayed as by a lot of people. And I feel like his surroundings in Tri-City, he's a bit on his own there a little bit in a lot of the things that he does really well. Whereas Mrtka has this dependability to him, which is kind of, but I'm kind of rambling here, but I feel like Smith, there's more mobility and there's more of a physical edge to him, for better or worse. But Mrtka, like, they kind of complement each other interestingly. But for me with Mrtka, yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I totally agree. But I think it just comes down to a matter of like valuing certain player archetypes relative to others, because I think in that area of the draft, it gets very, 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 very close.
Yeah, I think if he's a 22, 23 minute a night defenseman who's an excellent rangy skating two-way type at the NHL, that has a ton of value. And I'm not sure Jackson, like, I like Jackson Smith a lot. I like him a lot. He's my third ranked defenseman right after Mrtka. I'm just not sure Jackson Smith gets to that kind of level in terms of, and you mentioned, you thought there was more built. Like I would argue that from a mobility standpoint, that Mrtka is a better skater than Smith. But I'm not. I like Jackson a lot. I would sooner bet on him to become a 19, 20 minute a night defenseman than a 22, 23 minute a night defenseman. So I think that's ultimately where the distinction is for me. Now, again, we're talking about two of the 3 or 4 best deep prospects in this draft, but it's the unique nature of how Mrtka does it, the way that he looks, and the way that NHL blue lines are trending, which is emphatically towards length and skating. So I don't know. It's going to be fascinating, and maybe the pendulum has swung too far that way. Like maybe the Mrtkas and the Simashevs and the Salayevs, maybe those guys are going too high, and we'll know that 5-10 years from now. Certainly, I was much lower on Simashev. I had Salayev kind of right around where he went. Like I think he went 11th to New Jersey, and I had him.
I do like him more than Salayev. I like Mrtka a lot more than I remember.
But I got to be honest. I had Simashev too low. I think I had Simashev like 30th when he went 6th. So, but yeah, the game does seem to be going that direction.
I agree.
At least on blue lines. I think the games actually might be getting a little bit smaller up front, but on defense, the pendulum seems to be swinging back towards length and mobility. And Mrtka that's exactly what he is, right? Like that's.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I agree. I mean, it's again, like I said, like if we were working together and we were having this discussion behind the scenes, I could easily end up on your side. I mean, the one guy I do kind of want to go over before, I mean, you can stay as long as you like, but one guy that I do like more, but I think is riskier, but plays in the same league that you also mentioned in our messages before the show is Ben Kindel.
Yeah,
I find it very interesting, and I've said this before. I find it very interesting coming into a season, thinking a thing about a player that I've seen a bunch leading into the year, and going in with a certain set of expectations, and then you see him once and twice, 3 times, 4 times, and then you start seeing something else coming out from that player, and you're like, well, that wasn't what I expected. That I haven't seen before, or that is very new. And with Kindel, like I can poke a hole in his game easily where an NHL team would go, we're not drafting that guy where you have him. And I'll go, fair enough, but I think he's good enough to overcome it. And that's sort of his defensive physicality level. Like he just is not a very physical guy who, grinds play down and gets involved in a bunch of rushes. But I think otherwise, to me, if you're not getting a Michael Misa, I think Ben Kindel, for a guy who's playing center for the, I think, first time this year, he's still listed as a winger. I don't think he's a downgrade, but in terms of smarts and bringing just an all around offensive game, like he finds little pockets of space, he makes plays. Like Michael Misa, it's not that he's a better sniper than everyone. It's not that he's a more creative playmaker than everyone. It's not that he's more physical than everyone. It's just he's just better than everybody. But he's not super physical. And I feel with Kindel, he's a step back, obviously, but there is that, like, no matter what on the ice, he finds a way to march the play up the ice. He finds a way to create offense. He does it from the middle of the ice. And for me, it just checks so many boxes where I'm going, yeah, like he's not the biggest guy in the world, the most physical guy in the world. And I feel like that'll scare teams away. But I feel like there's just a ton of value there. And it's only just sort of started to come out. Like his second half this season has been unbelievably good. Like I think he's been 2 points a game since the series that we were at in Oshawa and London. I'm pretty sure he's been 2 points a game ish or something like that since then. And I thought he was fantastic in those games. So he's just grown on me and grown on me and grown on me. And I find it very interesting when a player starts the season in my books is like, yep, I like them. They're smart, capable, 200-foot, whatever. And then as the season goes on, it's just, holy crap, this is taking off. So I'm curious of your read on Kindel, because you have him more towards the end of the first round. But I adore him. And every time I watch him, I see a lot in his game that I like.
Yeah, and there is a ton in Ben's game to like. I've warmed on him and sort of risen him up my list with each ranking this year as well. I think he's 23rd on my list at the moment, but I did debate him sort of that 16, 19, like that late teens range as well. The thing that I've always has been the hiccup for me, if you will, with Ben is the size piece of the puzzle, which you mentioned there. Like you see him in real life and you run into him, and he is a tiny, skinny, thin kid. Now, he's got, I think he's 5'11, so it's not like we're talking about a short kid, if you will. And I think we make too much of height in our player evaluations of teenagers in many cases. But I do think I'm not sure he's going to be able to play the same style that he plays in the WHL in the NHL someday and have the same impact against players who are 215, 220 pounds and defend hard. I don't think he's going to be able to slip and sort of outthink his way around the ice at quite the same way. But a ton to like we're talking about a kid who plays with a ton of pace, works his tail off. I actually, you mentioned he's not super physical off puck and that kind of thing, but I actually think off puck he's one of the better forwards in this draft, just in terms of in terms of pure work ethic, energy, tracking, up and under sticks, all of the details and the habits and all of that is there.
100%.
And then on top of it, he's one of the smartest players in the draft. He kind of reminds me of a better, higher energy version of what Tarek Parasak was a year ago. Tarek, I think, went 19 to Washington, something like that. And I had him, I think, a little bit lower than that. I think I had him in the late 20s. I'm higher on Kindel than I was on Tarek because I think he drives more. Tarek, a lot of his offense was driven by playing off of excellent line mates and being smart and timing and right place, right time and using spacing. Kindel, I think, involves himself more than Tarek and is more of a driver than Tarek was at the same age. But I just wonder, like, what role is he going to play? Like, I'm not sure he's a top 6 skill playmaking type. Maybe he plays with those types of players and is a very effective player alongside them. I'm not sure he's a natural checker, despite being a very smart, diligent off-puck player. Like, I just don't know what he's going to be at the end of the day in the NHL. Now, we're still talking about a kid who's going to break 100 points this year and is going to be a first-round pick and is still high on my list. But I do think there's a threshold of when do you feel comfortable betting on that? A lot like there was with Parasak a year ago. I think Capitals probably bet on him a little bit too high. But I just don't like. I look at Victor, like the guys in my top 10: Victor Eklund, Justin Carbon. At the back of my top 10: Radim Mrtka, Victor Eklund, Justin Carbonneau, Desnoyers, I think, is in that group. Anton Frundell has really come on strong and played excellent hockey here over the last few weeks, and seems to be getting into better shape, which I think is important for Anton. Like, I just think those guys are sure bets than Kindel is. Now, maybe Kindel pops and maybe Kindel becomes Braden Point and we all are laughing about it 10 years from now, right? I don't think that's a completely out of the question outcome, but I think it's as great as a Braden Point is, or that player type, that style of player is, you have to be elite to make that game work. And I'm just not quite convinced that Kindel's going to be able to make it work in the same way he does at the junior level, at the NHL level.
The only thing I will say is that you mentioned his size as a concern, but like and I'm just tossing this guy's name out there because the way he's talked about is wildly different from Ben Kindel. But there's a lot of people out there who feel very, very certain about a guy like Brady Martin. And Brady Martin is listed at 2 inches taller, but thinner. Like he's 170, no, not thinner. Yeah, he's listed at 174 pounds. And Kindel is smaller, but heavier. And so I get the argument that like a guy like Brady Martin will gain more weight and round out his game and everything. But I find it really interesting that we talk about size and all of these things, and it's kind of like the margins are so small. Like the margins are so small, but the way that guys are presented as like, what are they capable of? What will work? What won't work? Like, I feel like we get so in the weeds about these things. Whereas, because when I look at a Ben Kindel, I go, if someone's there from day one thinking you are brilliant and you've taken a huge step in your game this year, and there's a huge amount of potential in you and we believe in you, and you pat him on the back and you give him the reps, and because I think he's smart enough on the fly, under pressure, offensive zone, defensive zone, that he makes it work no matter what. And I don't see that in a whole lot of other players in this draft class. Like all zones, every single situation. I get that a guy like Brady Martin plays that style of play where it's like in the NHL, guys are going to be all over him. He can still find a way to make a play, but
Yeah, with
I
Martin,
don't
I would
know.
just say like Martin is the has the highest motor, whatever cliche. Like Martin is the in terms of RPMs, work ethic, intensity, tempo. Martin just never. I don't know if I can use the language, but Martin just never fucking stops. Like
Right.
Martin is an animal out there in terms of determination, physicality, bowling guys over. I think his strength, despite the fact that they're similar in weight, I think that the strength component that you see in Martin's game every night, where he's bodying guys off of pucks and that kind of a thing, I think it just presents itself a lot differently than Kindel. I guess for Kindel, like if you think he's Seth Jarvis or Nick Suzuki, and maybe he is, then he's a top 10 pick all day. But like, are you to flip it to you? Are you confident that he can be Seth Jarvis or Nick Suzuki, or is he somewhere below that? And if he's not those guys, how confident would you be using a top 10 pick on him?
Honestly, I don't see a real reason to doubt him. Like based on how he plays and how he like he there is never a situation where I've found that he can't find a way to make some kind of play. Like he is pinned, like every single area that I track data on, he's pinned way at the top. And like again, it's like I did not expect that coming into the season. It's every situation. So for me, it's like, yeah, I would take a bet on this guy. Like I think like what again, I'm not saying this because I think it like why are we talking about a guy like James Hagens at the top end of the draft? He's 5'10", not the most physical guy. Like, yes, he's fast, right? Like he's got speed and a lot of skill at high speeds, but then you have a guy like Ben Kindel, and I know on the surface it sounds ridiculous to compare the two, but Kindle is new to playing center as far as I know. He wasn't doing that last year as far as I remember. And just whether the game is fast or slow, it seems like he knows what's going on, how to make a play, how to do things. And I also think you could levy similar concerns about a guy like James Hagens, but you're going to see Hagens go probably 20 picks earlier. So for me, it's like it depends on how you sort of see things when you sort of zoom out big picture. So for me, yeah, I think that in terms of smarts on the puck, off the puck, both sides of the puck, making plays as a playmaker. Like we talked about how smart Macklin Celebrini was last year. Celebrini's not the most physical guy in the world either, right? But he's smart, reads play super well, stick lifts, those things we were talking about. The energy in his game is really high. Obviously, there's more to Celebrini's game than a Ben Kindel, but like I don't know. I don't see a reason to bet against him, especially in this draft class. And I've been really just taken with him every single time I see him this year.
I think the distinction I would make with Hagens in particular is that A, I think Hagens is a better skater, and B, I think he's just got more skill on the puck. Like it's more natural in terms of beating guys, the evasiveness, the creativity, the craft on the puck, the touch, the release. Like if you swapped, I always go back to like a swap scenario. Like if you swapped Ben Kindel onto the first line for Team USA at the World Juniors, is Ben Kindel in his current form putting up 9 points in 7 games or whatever it was? Is Ben Kindel, if you swapped him onto Team USA with Cole Eiserman 2 years ago, is he leading the U18 Worlds and setting the U18 Worlds record in points, or the U17 Worlds record in points, or is he a 100-point guy at the NTDP or a 40-point guy in college? Like I think I would recenter it that way in terms of trying to find where those distinctions are. Now, that's not to say Ben isn't extremely talented and a strong skater and all of the things that James also is, but I've seen more high level skill, more sort of a dynamic quality on the puck with Hagens than I have with Ben.
Right.
Like I
I mean,
think
yeah,
if James Hagens is playing in London this year, who owned his rights, and I know James did consider going to London this year. If James is playing in London this year, I think he's right up there with Misa in terms of leading the OHL in scoring. Like I think that's the talent that we're talking about with Hagens.
yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to knock James Hagens. I'm just trying to like reframe the
Yeah,
conversation. Like Hagens is still way higher than Kindle for me, right? Like it's
yeah.
but it's just a matter of like weighing pros and cons, and when you bring certain discussions to the table. what are those dividing lines that make people like, because again, like the difference between those two might be 20, 30 picks on draft day. And anyway, regardless, like I don't want to keep you forever. If you have time, I would love to talk one more player, but if you have to run,
Sure.
you can
No,
run.
let's do it.
All right. I want to talk about Ivan Rabkin because I have seen this guy for 2 years over and over and over and over again. And I am now absolutely clueless of what I think about him. And I am absolutely hopeless and lost.
You're not alone.
I know.
NHL
But
teams don't know what they think of him.
You have him top 20, and
Yeah.
I don't. I have him in my second round.
Yeah.
And based on what I've seen of him this season, I have just not. Anyway, I'll let you give me the pitch on Ivan Rabkin, top 20 NHL draft pick, because I'm a blank slate because I have no friggin' idea what I'm looking at when I watch him anymore.
Yeah, and that's how I felt. I mean, we talked the last time I was on, I think was in the fall, and we talked about specific, like literally this. We had this conversation of what the hell is this kid doing out there, because it's not productive and it's not helping his stock. And on many nights, you tune into him in the MHL and think this kid is completely lost. Like this kid has forgotten how to play hockey. And I think part of that was just the situation he was in. There are character concerns, and I hate to always tie Russians to that, but with him specifically, there actually were those. The healthy scratches that he had in the MHL were not just play related. I was hearing even before this season, before he went downhill this season, coming out of last season where he set the U17 points record in the MHL, even coming out of the high of that, where he was viewed as a top 10 guy in this draft and all of that, there were sort of talk of him being a difficult teammate and tough to coach and that kind of a thing. And then ultimately he kind of forces his way out in a very awkward way of his MHL contract, or his KHL contract, I should say. Right. So yeah, at front half of this season, I was out on Rabkin. Like I didn't see it. Then he comes over, he slew foots a guy.
Yeah.
What was it? His second game?
Yeah, second game. Yep.
Gets suspended. But in saying that, this is still a kid who, again, as I mentioned off the top, set the U17 NHL scoring record a year ago. And it's still a kid who's come over, and now that he is settled in Muskegon and sort of figuring out his game again, I think we've seen that there's a skill gap between him and the other guys that are going to go in the late first, second round range. So I think that's ultimately what it has come down to for me now. Would I be confident picking him where I have him? I think I have him 17th. I've moved him down to 17th now. Maybe not. Maybe that changes. Maybe by the time the draft comes around, he's more of a 20s guy for me. But I don't think I could get to a point with him, even if he still isn't popping or still isn't as consistent as I'd like. I don't think I could get to a point with Ivan where I view him as a second round pick. Like on talent, I think he's a first round talent. And I've always tried to sort of come back, like pull myself back to that, if you will, this year when watching him. And recently, like my last few viewings before I put out this list, he was excellent. Like it was the best hockey I'd seen him play this year. He was the driver of offense on his line. He was creating. He was lethal on the power play. The bulk of Muskegon's best looks were coming through him. Tynan Lawrence, who's going to be a top 10, top 15 pick in next year's draft in 2026. I thought there was a clear skill gap even between Rabkin and Lawrence, who's obviously a very, very good young player, one of the best young players in the USHL in his own right. This goals have started to come. That was another thing with Rabkin. It was like he couldn't score. Like he had 0 goals. So it's been nice to see him put the puck in the net. He still, I think, doesn't really know how to play hockey, and that's a concern. But he can make plays. Like he's extremely talented on the puck. He's got some great offensive instincts. He's got a filthy release. He's got some of the quicker hands in the draft. He's got good enough size. I think he's got good enough pace and skating. I would like to see the pace more consistently. But I think it is in there. And I think with the right coaching, he's the kind of player who could, like if he goes on day 2, for example, early on day 2, which I think is possible in some of the conversations I've had with NHL scouts, it's very possible he slips out of the first round. If he goes day two. Like, I think we could be talking about him a few years from now in the way that we talked about some other weird guys that people couldn't wrap their heads around, like a Bobby Brink who had his warts and eventually figured it out. And obviously, Arthur Kaliev was on waiver. I'm just thinking of like guys who had first round talent, but went in that second round range, who kind of figured it out over time. Obviously, Logan Stankoven is a completely different beast, and Wyatt Johnston, and some others. But I think that the conversation with him feels a lot, very different players, but the conversation with him feels a lot like it did for Kaliev, for example, a little bit like it did for Quentin Musty as well. Like guys who just people didn't like, they didn't enjoy. Brad Lambert, like there's guys that have come and gone over the years and drifted and fell, and then ultimately you got to make a bet on the talent, and you eventually you got to stick your neck out on the talent and say there's enough of a gap here between player A and player B at a certain point in the draft that even if you have concerns about the attitude, the inconsistency, etc. And I think Brad Lambert's a great example of that, because Brad's on a path now, I think, to sort of putting it all together and getting back to where the talent always suggested he would get to. Now, again, very different player than Brad Lambert, very different player than Bobby Brink, Arthur Kaliev, all of those kids. But I think from a pure skill talent standpoint, like if he makes it in the NHL, he's going to be on a power play and in a top six role. And there will come a point in the draft where all of those guys are gone, where there's no other guy that you can look at and say, this guy has top six talent. So that's the distinction that I've tried to make in my list, is once you get into, yeah, I know we talked about Bill Zonin, but Bill Zonin and Brady Martin and some of those sort of very projectable, going to have long pro career guys, could I be convinced that those are better prospects? Absolutely. Are they more projectable prospects? Absolutely. Are they safer prospects? Absolutely. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around whether I would take a Bill Zonin in the 20s or 30s over a player like Rabkin. And frankly, the other player who kind of fits into that mold for me is Riker Lee, who we haven't even talked about. But I know we're both very high on from a skill standpoint. Like Riker there's going to be a time in the draft where Riker's the most, from a pure puck skill talent standpoint, where there's a huge divide between Riker and everybody else. That's 100%. Probably going to be somewhere in the middle of the second round where he gets picked. But I think Riker has a very compelling first round case because of the talent. And I think there's the place that I've landed on Rabkin is similar, where guys like Lee and Rabkin, I think they've got more pop. They might bust, and Lee just needs to get more pace in his game in order to figure it out, because I think absolutely everything else in Riker's Lee game screams second line power play winger. But I think Rabkin's the same way. Like, could Rabkin become a second line talented power play guy in the NHL? I think that's within the realm of possibility, even if the odds of him getting there are maybe lower than they are for a Braden Coots or a Bill Zonin or a Brady Martin or a Jack Nesbitt or some of the guys that we know are going to go in the first round, because teams just love how projectable they are.
Yeah, I think with Rabkin, like you said, I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen him in a little bit. It's been a little while since I've seen him, but for me with him, it's like, I agree. I think there is a certain point in the draft where you kind of go, let's hope we're drafting him in the hope that what we saw last year is kind of his future. Like he gets back on track and sort of figures something out. But like when I've seen him, I see sort of the quality of his offense, like the finishing ability right around the net. Like that seems to be where his best results come, is like when the puck is already in the offensive zone and sort of locked in. He does have a bit of defensive involvement for a center, which is good. You want to see that kind of thing. But I find that he is a little bit like everything with him. The big problem for me watching him in Russia and even watching him in Muskegon is like everything just feels like he's in slow motion. Like everything, I know the hands are good. Like he's got, once in a while, you see him just do something and you're like, holy, okay, that wasn't there before. But more often than not, whether it's rushing the puck up the ice, making a decision to get pucks out of his own end, doing it with control reliably, it just seems very slow. And I don't really remember that from last year. Like, obviously, I'm with you. Like, I don't really like getting into like character problems or anything like that. But with him, it just felt like I don't know if it's like gaining weight or not training enough in the off season, but based on year over year, everything just kind of slowed down. and he was trying stuff, but it just was not happening. So for me, it's a matter of like, I feel like in Russia things just did not go his way. He tried to do something about it, and that just snowballed into a bit of a PR disaster. Which, whether one way or the other, I don't really want to put money on what actually is the situation. But again, it's time I check him out again, because when I watch him, I go, I see more of a guy that almost has regressed into like almost like I'm trying to think of like a guy in the NHL over the last 15 years who is a skilled player, but ends up as sort of like a third line sort of pesky guy, you
Yeah,
know?
I think of like the poor outcome for him would be Daniel Sprong or Eli Tolvanen, that kind of player type, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my thought was more like I'm trying to think of like because he seems to play, and again, I might just be getting sample sized here, but to me, he seems to play like just like a rat game. Like he plays a little bit more of that ratty style. Like off the puck, you see little things, and you're like, I don't know, like that would annoy me, right? Like these little things where you're like, he's kind of either playing frustrated or what. But anyway, regardless, I think he's an interesting one.
I'll be fascinated to see where he goes and which team takes him. So, like, I could see Vegas taking him. I could see,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
I could
I
see
totally agree.
I could see Seattle taking him.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he might end up a player, but I just, again, like when it comes time to like, I am going up to the microphone and I am saying his name.
Yeah, it's
Who
going to be
who
tough for a
who would
team.
have to be off the board for me to go, I'm taking Ivan Ryabkin? I really don't know. I have no idea. And that's really weird for me because I went into this season thinking he was going to be one of the most skilled offensive players, and it took about 8 minutes of watching him in the MHL for me to go, something's not right here. Something doesn't pass the smell test here. And I don't know. And I'm still in that boat of I don't really know what to do with him. Anyway,
He's a player who could have really benefited, unfortunately, too, from playing at U18 Worlds, because I think he could have really
yes.
popped there. Like if he goes to U18 Worlds and he puts up 13 points in 7 games and is first or second in the tournament in scoring,
Yeah.
it maybe rewrites his season a little bit. And I think he would have been capable of doing that. Would have been their first line center, would have been their power play quarterback, all of that. And without that, I'm just not sure whether he's going to be able to sell people enough in Muskegon and pop enough in Muskegon. Like people forget the USHL is a tough league, a very tough league to score in particular.
Yes.
So, yeah, he's gone from one very bad situation to a better situation that has helped his stock. But I'm just not sure there's enough runway for teams to wrap their heads around. Okay, am I ready to put my job on the line with a first round pick on this guy?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes because I agree. I look at Riker Lee and he's grown on me and grown on me and grown on me all through the
Riker's
season. And
nasty. He's the most, as far as public and private scouting, both in NHL scouts I talk to, they don't seem to like him. And public lists, I think, and I know you have him high, so credit to you. I think Riker is one of the most underrated talents in this draft.
I feel like the first couple months of the year, I kind of was like, I don't know if he's just figuring out his way in the USHL or what, but I feel like since like December, he has just popped and something happened where he got some level of confidence and went, you know what, like I'm going to try to just deke through everybody. I'm going to attack everybody as much as I possibly can. I'm going to do everything that you need a player to do. So for me, it's like, would I take a guy like that over an Ivan Ryabkin? Probably, based on what I've seen this year. But on draft day, is Ryabkin going to go, like you said, 36th? And is Riker Lee going to be there at 50? Right? Like, if I were king of the world, it wouldn't go that way. But because I just can't, I don't know. This is what I mean. Like, I'm kind of turned around in knots and twisted up a little bit. It's just very, very weird. There's a few players like that in this year's draft, to be perfectly honest.
Well, like where the hell do Cameron Schmidt and Adam Bannock?
Yeah. Cameron Schmidt, Adam Bannock. I mean, I know he's going to go super early, but I don't know what to do with a Roger McQueen. I really like what Anton Frondel brings to the table. I don't know what he's going to be as an NHL player at the end of the day. He's going to be an NHL player. That is certain. Like he plays that NHL style of play. but what is his job going to be? What is his role? Where is he? How many minutes is he going to get? Like, what's he going to be? Right. And it's like, for me, that kind of matters in terms of where you say yes to that player in the draft, right? Like, there is certainty. So if you really value certainty, then definitely these kinds of players are higher on a list or whatever. But there's a bunch of guys this year where, yeah, like you said, even Schmidt and Banach, like, what do you do? I don't really know. Like, where they're number one on your list. I mean, I feel like there will be a time when Cameron Schmidt is undoubtedly the most talented player
Yes.
available.
Yes.
But I've heard people talking about him not being a first round pick, and I would not be surprised if that's the case. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting because I honestly have no idea. Like, for about 8 or 10 guys that are ranked pretty high in general, what's going to happen.
Yep.
But anyway, I mean, unless you have any, I don't want to keep you forever. Unless you have anything else you'd like to throw out there, discuss before you take off. You're free to, no.
My last one, I like, just to follow up on your point. I hope we get to see Roger McQueen. Frankly,
I know.
He's the real wild card of all of this, and I have
Yes.
no idea. I have no idea what to do with him at this point. So
yeah, I feel like he's been 2 weeks away from coming back for about 3 months, and I don't know what's going on there. I mean, there is chatter behind the scenes about what's going on with him, but I don't know. He's a tricky one.
There's hope that he's going to play still this year, but there was hope that Caden Lindstrom would play this year, and we
Yeah.
still haven't seen Caden Lindstrom back on the ice. And something about that height and the back, those guys just. Gabe Velarde, who we talked about off the top, dealt with the exact same thing. 6'4", 6'5" kid who the back just was never right, and it took him years and years and years of dealing with it. Now Velarde's figured it out, and he's become a very good player despite it all. But there was a time where people thought that Gabe Velarde might not play in the NHL. So I don't know. And teams coming into this year felt that Roger had a chance to be a top 3 or 4 pick in this draft, and now all those teams are still excited about him and his game and what he offers and the package and the length and the skill and all of it. And yet, when can you feel comfortable? The medicals are going to be a huge part of it, but when can you feel comfortable making that pick when you could just take Victor Eklund or whoever else in that sort of top 10 range, right? So, like, is Roger going to linger until the teens? I don't think so, based on how high people were on him pre-draft. But who knows? I mean, people thought Adam Jiricek was going to be a top 10 pick pre-draft, and Adam Jiricek ended up in the 20s. So I don't know.
Yeah,
man.
I don't know either. And if he doesn't play for the rest of the season, like, I didn't think he was amazing in the 8 games that he did play before getting hurt.
Now,
so
he was playing injured. It should be noted, like, I know for a fact he was playing injured in all those games. So to still have
so
8 goals in 8 games or whatever it was, 11 points and 8 goals in 8 games, I think it was, while playing injured. I thought he only played a game and a half before he also got injured at U18 Worlds, but I thought he was Canada's best center at U18 Worlds in the spring in Finland before he went down there too. Like, there's been some real highs for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's going to come right down to the wire.
If that's the case, if he's been fighting injury that much, God bless the NHL scout who's going to go up on that stage and call his name 5th or 6th, right?
Yeah.
Like, Godspeed, because I don't have the courage to do that. I don't have the courage to do that right now. Anyway, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to plug whatever you want. Take your time, do what you like, and it's always a pleasure having you on, and we hope to have you back soon, eh?
No, nothing really to plug these days. The new draft ranking came out last week. The top 100 drafted prospects ranking came out last week, and now it's just full steam ahead on the draft. And I'll be in St. Louis for the Frozen Four, and I'll be in Texas for the U18s, and that's sort of. And then obviously we'll have the Combine in Buffalo, and then it'll be Los Angeles. Although I might not be in Los Angeles.
I'm not going. I'm
on the fence. I'm on the fence about going. So
yeah, we're doing this. We're doing this on draft day. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us. You're welcome anytime. It's always a pleasure. And thanks for hopping on.
Yeah. Cheers, man.
All right, dude. Alrighty. Well, that was Scott Wheeler. So handsome. AJ.
Somebody say my name. Handsome.
You're still here? Yeah, right. You're still here?
Yes.
You were an attentive listener, I would imagine, for that entire thing. Not playing EU4, not getting your Pax Romana on.
No, only during game tape interviews do I do that.
Right. Okay. Well, thoughts, feelings,
that was awesome. It was great.
Yeah, I love Scott. Scott's great.
That was great because I've been telling Will behind the scenes, come on, man, just tell them what you really think. Tell them what you really think. And Will did it today, and I'm proud of him. You're a good boy, Will. Good job.
Yeah. Well, we're getting there.
That was great because
one interview at a time. He's great.
I really feel like you need to be more confident in your opinions when you talk to some of the media people, like more mainstream guys. Because I think it, honestly, I think it makes for the best conversations when you don't fully agree with what they're saying. And I thought it was really interesting to see how you both brought up counterpoints and just how great of a discussion it was. So I was listening attentively. And no, I could also not. I don't want to try running EU4 during a stream. I'm very good.
That's true.
I'd be very concerned that the stream would be not so good. And also, Tony's here and heard me. You didn't hear anything, Tony. You didn't hear anything. I definitely won't be doing it today with Malcolm Spence. I promise.
Oh, well, there you go. There's the spoiler alert. We got Malcolm Spence coming on for a game tape later today, so that'll probably drop next week after, something like that.
We did Jackson Smith yesterday, so that one that one's gonna come out first. It'll be next Friday because I don't have. Obviously, I can't put together an episode in 2 days.
No, it's more difficult than it sounds. Yeah.
So we'll do that next Friday, and then the Friday after that will be Malcolm Spence. So
sick. Well, yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't know. I think it is very easy to talk to Scott, especially because I think he and I agree more than it might seem.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of who values what and why, right? Like I think there were some legitimate disagreements where I just fundamentally do not agree. But the way that, this is why I love, picking brains of other people who do this kind of thing, because you kind of can get inside their heads a little bit and kind of go, well, like, how do you see things? How do you think about the game as a whole? Because I think that when you are doing this work and looking at all these players and analyzing all of them and picking one or the other, like, that's why I kind of kept asking him, like, when is this the player that you're going to take? Like, when is this the guy that when you go up on stage, you're going to say their name, and who are you saying no to? Because I think that's the most important question. You can say, I like this guy, I like this guy, I like this guy. But when you get inside their head a little bit and go, but why? Like, why do you like this player more than this player? And like a lot of these questions I was asking him, it was largely out of like curiosity of what he would say, like put him outside of a zone where it's like, well, what about a discussion of Ben Kindel versus James Higgins, right? Like, what if someone's never thought about that, right? Like, how do you make that a discussion? So I think Scott is very receptive to that kind of thing. I know he puts in the work, and I know for a fact that he is working hard, even though obviously we don't see everything eye to eye. And so I mean, it's always a pleasure having him on, and I think also with the matter of me having sort of what you call confidence to like push back, I think it's that, like, with all due respect to Stephen Ellis, who's been on the show a whole bunch of times, he's a riot, he's a lot of fun. I don't really know exactly how to push back on some of the stuff that he brings up, because I just think that I just see things fundamentally differently. Whereas with Scott, it seems like the way he explains his standpoints is more, I don't know how to put it. Like, I don't want to say academic, but like it's more like detailed and nuanced and very sort of off the ice, oriented as well, right? Like, so it's interesting. It's interesting because it does kind of give me a little bit more room to sort of go, well, yes, that might be true, and I believe you, right? Like, I see where you're coming from, especially because Scott, there's this room with him where it's like, I agree because I see things similarly, but we
Differ on
differ.
what you value, I think.
We differ in very certain areas that you can still have a conversation about and go both ways. Like Radim Mrtka, right? Like, he really loves him. I have other guys higher than him, but again, like, I'm honest when I say, like, if we were on a team together and had to come to an agreement on who to draft at 8th overall, and he was like Mrtka and putting his fist down about it, I'm going, you know what? I get it. I get it. I'm not going to forget that you put your fist down about this guy just in case in 3 years, but, well, 5 maybe, but I don't think that you're actively causing problems. I get where you're coming from. So it's interesting to talk to him, and it's always great having him on the show, and it's great that he makes time to come and hop on.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot. I meant to ask him how many goals Canada wins by tonight and who the hero is. Shit, I forgot. I'll have to. Damn, that would have been, because obviously Canada's going to win tonight. Obviously.
Says the guy who picked the States to win on Tuesday.
Hey, my patriotism's coming out today, baby. I woke up on the right side of the bed. Logic is out the window. Canada's going to win.
Come
it's
on,
be
Will.
awesome.
I know you're a lefty. You never wake up on the right side of the bed.
I actually do wake up on the right side of the bed, actually. Yeah. So
okay.
Left, I don't like, I've never been a get out of bed. Actually, that's not true. When I lived with my parents growing up, I got out of bed on the left side, but now I get out of bed on the right side. But it's the way it's the side the door is on. I wonder if that's what it is. I like to sleep on the side of the bed where the door is. I don't know. Maybe that's weird. Anyway.
Well, I can only get up on the right side of the bed because the left side is a wall.
Ah, you're one of those.
Yep.
Right. The corner beds.
Absolutely.
Yep. I've never been a corner bed person. I couldn't do it. I was a corner bed person when I was a little kid, but when we moved when I was a teenager, I became a bed in the middle of
What are you calling me, a little kid? Huh?
Yeah. I mean, to me, kinda,
Yeah, I am 10 years your junior.
Yeah, you were born at the millennium, so a little bit, but no, you're not a kid. You're a grown ass man. Anyway.
Yeah, that's right, Mom and Dad. You tell him. You tell him.
Tell me what I am.
You tell him.
Yeah, I'm a grown up.
Alrighty, man.
Anyway,
you want to get into the chat questions? I don't think there's a ton, but that's all good. You guys can add
we've got
some
half
more.
An hour. Yeah, we've got half an hour, and that's plenty of time, I think. So someone asked about Frundell. I mean, we only touched on him very briefly. Obviously, he's been extremely productive in the last month. I think he is a player where he's gonna be an NHL player. Like, if he is the way he is and stays that way for 7 years, he's gonna play 5 of those years in the NHL at least. He's physical enough. He's strong as an ox. He's a good enough shooter. He has really, I think he's a really great complementary forward. Like, I think when I watch him and I see him play on the wing with Djurgården, I think he looks really good there. Like, as a guy where he chips in everywhere on the ice. He's physical. He plays hard. He plays, quote unquote, the right way. He protects the puck extremely well. He's got some good hands as well under pressure and can get chances and everything. Like, I have to stress, right? Like, the range in which I have Frundell is a really, really, really close range. Like, I like him more than a guy like Desnoyers, and I think that's, I could easily see why. But I do think that range is extremely, extremely close. Like, I don't see him as one of the top guys out there, but he is not far behind in terms of certainty and upside and projectability. So, and I know for a fact Scott loves Frundell as well. He's, I think he's at 6 on his list, if I'm looking correctly. Yeah. So he's got Desnoyers, then Frundell, then McQueen, then Mrtka, then Eklund, then Justin Carbonneau. We didn't get to touch on Justin Carbonneau a whole lot, but I think he and I kind of see him somewhat similarly, and so I guess we just didn't get to it.
Just out of curiosity, and also for the viewers, Who are Scott's top 3 or top 4?
Yeah, I was gonna ask him about this, but we didn't have the time. So he's got Schaefer, Misa, Hagens, and then Martone as his top tier, and then Desnoyers, Frondell, McQueen, and then another tier of Mrtka, Eklund, Carbonneau, O'Brien, Bear, yada yada yada, all the way down to Keyshawn Aitchison at 15. And then he's got a bunch of fun guys actually at the top of the 4th tier: Schmidt, Rabkin, Cullen Potter, Lyndon Lakovich. All those guys are in there back to back to back, so that's fun. Anyway, but yeah, he sees the top 3 the same way I do. I have Martone at 5. I have Eklund at 4. But anyway, neither here nor there. It's pretty close though. Projection for Desnoyers. He talked about Desnoyers quite a bit. He obviously saw him as more of a second line, maybe good second line guy, but I see him as more of a third liner. So Frondell versus Desnoyers versus O'Brien. We kind of went over that a little bit. I mean, I have them in order of Frondell, Desnoyers, and O'Brien, I think. I think O'Brien and Desnoyers are somewhat similar in terms of what they bring to the table, just like smart puck movers who, I actually have O'Brien next door to Desnoyers, but he's ahead of him. Yeah, I mean, just really smart puck movers who see the ice really, really well and support their line mates really well and stitch lines together really well. But in terms of like drafting them super, super high, I'm not there. But Frondell, I mean, I have him higher than both of those guys. I just think there's so much diversity and positivity in his game that's projectable to the NHL that, you know, I feel like he's a playoff style grindy boy who has some skill and some good finishing ability. Like not much else you could really want. I just think there are some guys that I would swing on that I think bring a little bit more offensive impact and oomph. But Frondell he's had a hell of a last month and a half or so. How should we look at the USHL compared to the CHL and NCAA? I know it'll probably vary year to year. I mean, the USHL, I don't know if you're asking about like the USHL and CHL relative to the NCAA, but the USHL is, I mean, the NCAA is literally above the USHL in terms of age group and level. So, you know, the USHL and the CHL, I think the CHL is just very broad. There's 60 teams or so and 3 different leagues, and the USHL is like 12 teams or something like that. So the pool is really small in the USHL, and it is like Scott said, it's a physical league. It's hard to score in. You know, if you're a point a game guy in that league, you're having a pretty good time. The CHL, I mean, it depends. I mean, look at some of the teams that are, you know, in the CHL, you have teams that basically sell off everything and lose 8-1, 9-1, 10-3 for the rest of the year and just get a billion draft picks and try to load up for 2 years from now. And so that automatically gives opportunities to guys to score a hat trick and score 5 points in a game or score 6 points in a game because it's just the level of competition between teams is just not there. In the USHL, you don't really get that unless you're playing the Omaha Lancers this year. But otherwise, you don't really have that going on. It's much more, I don't know if I would say balanced, but it's definitely more egalitarian, so to speak. You don't have the same kind of like tank and rebuild strategy as much as in the CHL, which changes things. They're just different ball games, right? It's like different, you know, different rules, different everything, and it just kind of changes things a little. Are elite defensive defensemen the rarest thing in the NHL? Who would you even consider in this category? Just defensive defensemen, and they use Lindell, Faber, and Ekblad as options. I mean, if Faber, the thing is, like, the best defensive players often generate offense because they are so good defending.
Yes.
So like a Brock Faber is a really good example of that. And in my view, like getting a really, really good defensive player who doesn't play any sort of offense, that to me is not the most useful. Like you use the word like elite defensive defenseman, but like to me, if you're an elite, like that's like to me saying like, who are the elite offensive defensemen? Forget about two-way or defensive. It's like, well, there are some options in there, but like you're not gonna really get the answer you're looking for.
And we won't name him because our graphic designer will go nuts if we do. So
we can't do it.
We can't name drop the guy.
No, we can't. When you watch teams with multiple prospects on them, are you watching everyone at once to see how they impact the game, or focus on one player? I focus on one player and watch multiple times. I think obviously you can get a lot of sense of how the team plays when you're sort of zooming out and whatever. But I am most interested in the events the player's involved in, why they're involved in those events, how often they're involved in those events, and the results in those events, right? Like I find it very difficult to get a good read on things when I do zoom out and sort of watch a whole game. Like when I did the under 18 Five Nations recap, like that was a bit of a struggle for me because I had to sit back and watch the entire NTDP and go, okay, well, this guy played well in this situation, this guy played well here, and this guy did this and this and this. But like in the context of the draft, like I'm getting a little bit out of it, but I find it much more interesting to like gather data on performances of a player and go, okay, this is their impact on the game, and I can show it, right? Like this is the proof of the impact on the game. Assessment of McQueen. Predictably, he appears falling on draft boards with the injuries. Heard rumors is his issue is not temporary. His skill set outside of size unique enough to gamble on. So we touched on him, but I mean, I did not know that McQueen started the year playing injured and also got injured at the U18 national tournament. I don't know why he would play hurt to start the season.
Well, he scored 4 goals, right?
Right. He scored 4 goals while injured, so he must be sick. But no, I mean,
first overall,
I watched him, and I mean, so when Scott tells me that he was playing hurt in those few games, like, I mean, on one hand, I go, well, okay, like that explains why pretty much across the board he wasn't very impactful outside of hitting guys at 5-on-5
and scoring 4 goals
and scoring 4 goals in one game. But now I'm sort of sitting there going, okay, well, he got injured at the international tournament, did not fully recover, I guess, or got injured again to start the season, and then got injured again, or even worse, and has missed. He might not play for the rest of the year. And so that's why I said, like, I honestly don't know what to do with him. I think a team will take him. I think a team will draft him and bet on him. Like a guy like Morgan Riley played 12 games in his draft year, right? And Brian Burke said
all of his shifts twice.
Yep. And Brian Burke said he was the best player in the draft. And at the time, everyone was like, I don't know about that. And he turned out probably that he was right. Like Morgan Riley, say what you will about him, but in that draft class,
other than Andrei Vasilevsky.
Well, yes, Vasilevsky is a different one altogether, but he's definitely better than where he was drafted. Galchenyuk and Yakupov. The truth is,
I would say that Forsberg is probably the guy.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, Philip Forsberg.
Forsberg is definitely the skater you go with. Vasilevsky's probably the goal you go with. I haven't seen
list
that.
Is short.
Yeah, the list is short.
The list is short.
And where they took Morgan Riley makes sense to me.
Yep,
a decent pick.
But he wasn't that far off, saying that, especially among the defensemen in that draft.
Oh no, Brian Burke thought Morgan Riley was the best player in the draft.
Yes. I know,
like straight up.
Yeah. Like
and,
Ryan
he
Murray
is in my
and Griffin
heart.
Reinhart, Ryan Murphy and Griffin Reinhart, Ryan Murray, Griffin Reinhart, the 2 defensemen that went before him, clears those guys easy.
Oh yeah.
But anyway,
just use him properly, please. Use him properly. Let him be involved.
Okay.
Yes, and all the Leaf slander off the top of this show. I don't want to watch Pontus Holmberg and David Kampf. Well, I don't want to watch David Kampf. I'm with you, Mr. Scott Wheeler. But I do think he's right that Braden Point and Jack Eichel are better players than Mitch Marner. Just, I don't feel like the gap is so insane.
I think his point was more that like this tournament really shows you how good those players that don't get as much attention really are. Yeah. Like everybody and their dog knows what Mitch Marner is. But like when you really sit down and see a Jack Eichel, he played in Buffalo and he's playing in Vegas, but like,
oh, it's fair.
If Jack Eichel were playing in Toronto and Mitch Marner were playing in Vegas, I feel like you could say the same thing backwards at this point.
Vegas wouldn't have a Stanley Cup according to detractors.
Right. Fair enough. But you know what I mean, right?
Like, I know what you mean.
It's a matter of visibility and everything.
I felt that the one thing the opening of the show lacked was a bit of, my you know what? I got a free pass. Everybody's sworn on the show today. My shit disturber energy.
Right.
So I wanted to bring a little bit of that once When Scott left, and only save it for you.
That's okay. I get it. We're good. That's what we do here. Thoughts on Justin Carbonneau and where he'll land come draft day? He's been steadily climbing all year. So I have Carbonneau at 17, which is around the average. I think that if the NHL draft were all about drafting the fanciest skilled offensive guys out there, he would probably be in the top 10 at least. Really just like insane one-on-one ability. Very like eerily in a way, now that I'm thinking about it, like a little bit more of that Beckett Seneca vibe I get from him, where it's just like you give him the puck in the neutral zone, he's got a head of steam going. He can do stuff and he will embarrass you from time to time. Just he will find Carbonneau doesn't go to the net, I don't think, as much as Seneca, but the playmaking on Carbonneau, yeah, he has more goals than assists, but some of the stuff he tries in the offensive zone is silly. So again, it's a matter of what you value, and it's a matter of like what you want out of a player. Because I still look at Carbonneau and I go, I don't know, like defensively and off the puck, like he just does, unless it's like almost like if there's not offense to be had, he's not really a factor. And that's a bit of a problem for me with regards to like the NHL, because I always think playoffs, right? Like if you can have it, I can make a team good enough for the regular season, but the playoffs are what matter, and the playoffs are a bit of a different story. And Carbonneau, I just don't know about him there, but he will probably be a heck of an offensive skilled guy who is going to be very, very entertaining. And so, I mean, in the middle of the first round, I think is totally reasonable. I don't know where specifically, but yeah, I think middle of the first round. I wouldn't be surprised if he slips a little bit. But yeah, good player. I'm having a tough time gauging Frondell. I like the way he gets into scoring areas in his shot, but his pace and transition feel behind others. That's kind of how I feel about him. Like I think he, like I said, is a complimentary guy who is a physical presence, who protects the puck extremely well and drives play in the right direction a lot of the time, and is a, you put him on your first line, he can do the job, I think. Like maybe not like the guy on your first line, but the number 3 guy on your top line with, some really high end transition and skilled offensive guys. Frondell can definitely be a part of that group for sure. I don't know if this is up your alley, but are there any under 23 undrafted college and European players you see having a shot at being a guy? I mean, I think so. At the beginning of the season, I would have said Tim Lovell, but he left college and went to Finland and then left Finland. Because I love Tim Lovell, but Quinn Hudson, I think, is a guy who might get a look. I've really liked Quinn Hudson over the years. I almost had him ranked in like 2022, I think, when he was a +2. I really liked him with Chicago that year. I think that's where he was playing. Is Rhett Pitlick the one that I'm thinking of? Yeah, Rhett Pitlick. I still like him, and I feel like he should get a look somewhere. Montreal didn't keep his rights, so maybe a Rhett Pitlick is a guy I give a look to, I should say. Who else? I don't know. There's not a whole lot of other ones from what I'm just scrolling through here. Another one I've liked. He's a freshman, but I've liked him, is Andon Serbone. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But over the years, I've watched him, and I've really, really liked him. The guy on Michigan too. These are just guys I'm keeping an eye on. Garrett Shifsky, I think. Garrett Shifsky. Yeah, he's a 2003. I think it's a second year in college. I think. Yeah, it's his second year. I've really liked Garrett Shifsky for a number of years now. So he's another guy that I kind of have in the back of my mind. But those guys are still a little young, but they're definitely on the radar for me. Who do you think has the highest upside projectably going towards the end of the first? Probably Cameron Schmidt. I mean, Cameron Schmidt has an immense amount of upside, but he's going to have to hit hard to get there. I think he can do it, but I think NHL teams will hesitate and let him slip, and he will go later than he should on paper. And I think he could be a good one. Thoughts on Viggo Nordland? Fine. He's fine. Like skilled. He's kind of like Victor Klingsell, where it's like there's a lot of skill. He has good offensive zone vision, but like his overall impact on the game generally is kind of limited outside of the offensive zone, which is a bit of an issue for me. But I also haven't seen him in a while. But yeah, Viggo Nordland, he's a decent skilled offensive player that I just don't. Again, when is he the guy that I draft? I don't have an answer for that. I agree. I like Solberg more than Aitchison by a long shot. I think Solberg. I don't know. We can talk. We talked about Aitchison ad infinitum, but Solberg is a guy who I just felt like I thought the shot was better. I thought the pace in his game was better. I thought he had better puck carrying ability. He just didn't use it a whole lot. But I do think that the hockey sense and the defensive zone coverage stuff was a little bit lackluster. But I still see more in him that I think plays that role better than what I've seen of Aitchison. But again, I have to go back and watch him again. Same thing with Rabkin, because I don't want to go, I don't want to call it a day in February, but yeah, it's every time I've seen those guys, I sort of, it keeps reinforcing how I feel about them. And generally that to me is a pretty telling thing. Same thing with the Desnoyers. There's a bunch of them this year where I'm just like, okay, people see it differently, and I'm keep trying, I keep seeing, and I keep looking, and I just don't. I'm not there. I don't know.
The one thing that I will bring up, because when Scott Wheeler talked about Aitchison, he said one of the big things for him is that he's going to be really good in the playoffs. But like, think about all the defensemen that people have synonymous with playoff defensemen.
Right.
Like when I hear he's good in the playoffs, I think of Ben Sherratt, right? Like I don't actually think he's good in the playoffs, but people equate this bigger guy who's physical and mean into actually being like this really valuable, useful player. But there are 82 regular season games, and you got to get through those 82 regular season games in order to make the playoffs in the first place.
Yeah.
And how many times do we see Detroit Red Wings fans being upset about Ben Sherratt? It is a common occurrence because he's not very good. So, I don't know. I always find that, and I'm not trying to take away fully from Scott's argument, but I generally don't like the idea of building for the playoffs with a player. Like, as the only focus. You better be good every single game, or like you should be able to be good. It should translate to every game you play.
I think people conflate good in the playoffs with good at breaking the rules. Like I don't think that those two things are the same thing. Like when I watch guys, let's take for example Teddy Stiga last year. Like I loved him because I don't care how big he is. You throw him over the boards, he's going to bust his ass and drive things in the right direction, and he's got skill, and he doesn't take his foot off the gas pedal. Like he brings so much to the table that matters in the playoffs. Like to me, it's more about the style of play in the playoffs rather than how the game is called in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, and those two things are very different to me. And so I think people conflate the two. And in my books, like I look at Kaanan Hes and I'm going, he's a guy who is going to mix it up in the playoffs. He's going to be a guy who cross-checks his own player or cross-checks an opponent into the goalie and then punches them in the head about it, probably. But the point is, like, they just got a scoring chance from in front of the net, right? Like that to me is the bigger issue. So I don't know. And again, like I wish, I don't want to pick on Aitchison every single show, but he is a case where he is ranked very, very, very high. And much of the results I've seen in the games that I've done, and he plays a lot of minutes, so the sample adds up real quick. It's not very positive. And I mean, it's not, so to me, it's just like, I have to go with what I've seen and what I have on paper and all these things. So yeah, you can tell me X, Y, and Z about him, but it just doesn't line up with my vision and what I see for a team
and
what
value,
works in the game,
like what you value.
And value. Yeah. And what I value in the context of an NHL draft, right? Like the NHL draft is the easiest way to add high-end talent. You get a pick. You get to go, I want that guy, And so putting your name behind a guy, especially in the first round, you better be sure that you know who you like and why.
Yeah, and Wheeler did articulate that a big part of it is the playoffs, but for me, I view it differently. That's really what I'm saying. I'm not trying to attack his argument. It's more just a case of I want a guy who's going to be good every single game and bring very similar value in all the games.
Yeah. Is Michael Mies the highest floor in the draft? I mean, I don't know about what do you mean by highest floor, but I do think that he is a guy that no matter what will find a way to be a really, really good NHL player.
Well, what's the worst case scenario for Michael Mies? Because that's what I think that question's really asking is what is the worst case scenario? 2C?
I'd say a good second line center.
So that's a pretty high floor.
Yeah. I think that I look at Hagens, and I would say I'm not certain about James Hagens in the NHL. I'm not certain about. I think Porter Martone is a high floor plot player, but I'm not guaranteeing him a second line right winger. I don't know if I would guarantee that right now. And those floors kind of drop off. Those ceilings very quickly become a player's floor, in my opinion. Right? The other way around. Those floors very quickly become other players' ceilings in my books. And so for me, Misa and Schaefer, I think Schaefer does have maybe a bit of a lower floor, I guess, because Misa just does everything so well except hit guys. But that's because he kind of doesn't need to. It is so hard as a Sharks fan not to want the possibility of Celebrini and Misa down the middle. I mean, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, in this draft, at the top couple of picks, I don't think you can really go wrong. Especially if you're picking first or second. And I don't think you go wrong picking third or fourth and it's a Hagens or Martone or even an Eklund or something. Those guys are going to be good players, I think. Yeah. Sam McGilligan says Joel Armia. I imagine that's in reference to what was it? There was someone we were talking about.
Yeah. I forget who it was, but then I asked, is that the real scam McGillicuddy?
Yeah. Is it the real scam McGillicuddy? It is. It is indeed the real Sam.
We got Mikael Holm in the chat. We got Tony Ferrari. Yeah. We got all the gang's all here. Everybody's here.
I think. Okay. Yeah, Nashville with Hagens would be pretty wild. I agree. Riker Lee is playing like he was at Shattuck. Well, this is a Sam McGilligan comment, so he's probably wrong. The transition period is over. He's got a great understanding of the USHL. Yeah, I mean, I agree though. Riker Lee's been great. Very cool to see. Yeah, okay. But how big of a cold does AJ have?
I have a little bit of a cold, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so a little.
But it's not little, actually big.
Not big. Right. Not big.
Can't sing as well as I normally do, but that's about really the only downside. And a bit more nasally.
Someone commented that Victoria is a better game than EU4.
Well, I haven't played Victoria.
Me neither. So, yeah, no comment.
But I don't know. I really like EU4. So it's hard.
I like this one. Leaf fans will not stand for the Danford slander. Clearly the next Bobby Orr mixed with Boreas Salming. That's funny. Thoughts on Mason Moe? Yeah, I watched him today, actually. I didn't track any data on him. I tracked a bit of a game of Bruno Idzon and gave up, and then I tracked a bit of a game of Sam Spear and gave up because they were both just kind of, I don't know, I'm very tired today. And so instead I went and watched a little bit of Mason Moe because he's come up a few times. I think he's a great shooter. Like, I think his shot is really, really great. But I don't see him on the same level as some of the other guys in the USHL. Like Riker Lee plays a lot in the games in the video that I was watching of Mason Moe, plays with him, and Riker Lee is, oh boy, he is writing a lot of those checks. He is a heck of a player. Canada wins and takes Minnesota in one swoop. Yeah, there you go. Now we're talking.
Oh, Mikael.
Okay. Thoughts on Quinn Beauchene's offensive potential? Well, I mean, I don't know if it was you, but someone posted Quinn Beauchene trying to do a Michigan in the Scouching Discord server while we were doing the show. I don't know if it was Thomas Gagne. I don't know who that is.
Okay.
But at pretty much the same time, we got Quinn Beauchene doing a Michigan attempt. And I'm watching it right now, and yes, he did attempt it. I mean, look, I felt like the knives were coming out when I brought up Quinn Beauchene as a guy that I've liked more than Kayshawn Aitchison, because that on the surface sounds like a ridiculous thing to say. And I think with Beauchene, he just plays much more of a modern defensive game to me. It's just that he is not as big as he probably should be. So it's going to be a question of, can he overcome that? But like his delay game with the puck on his stick and moving the puck up the ice and seeing the ice really well, and some of his offensive moments, I think are really, really high end, like faking out opponents and creating space for himself and spinning off pressure, backhand passes into the slot, like really, really creative, really cool stuff that I've seen out of him. That doesn't come out a whole lot, but I think he's only scratching the surface of what he's capable of. And every time I've seen him, I'm going, I would love to work with this guy and see what he is. Maybe he's just a good AHL defenseman. Maybe, but I'm not. I don't bet against him. I really think that he's going to be. I think he could be a good player with good development. Okay, so it is Thomas Gagne. Okay, that makes sense. That lines up. Good. Yeah, fair enough. Got it. I've seen lots of love for Lambert, justifiably so, but have not heard your thoughts on Nikita Chibrikov as a prospect. Do you mind sharing your thoughts? Yeah, so Chibrikov, I think I had ranked at 22 or 23 that year. And I thought that for him, he was very much like what I said about Justin Carbonneau a little while back, where it's like if there was offense to be had and you really just valued skill and finishing ability and creativity, like Chibrikov was right up there. Really, really just impactful offensive player who wasn't driving as much offense as you would expect, but you still saw what he was capable of. You know, the skill level and the agility and the thinking on the fly and everything, just moving quick and doing everything quick. I've liked a lot. I liked a lot of what Chibrikov brought to the table, and I thought, middle six offensive scoring forward, middle of the first round, sure, I could see it, and I think he went too late, obviously. But yeah, he was a good player, and he's been good in the American League. And when I've seen him, I saw him with the Jets a little bit earlier in the year, and he was good.
The one thing I will say regarding Chibrikov, because I watched him in that draft here as well.
You did, yep.
He would have like 2 really excellent moments a game, and then then there was like a whole lot of nothing in between.
Yep.
There's like a flash of brilliance, maybe 2 of them, and then it was, wow, really nothing's going on.
Yeah.
And that's fine, because you can make a role out of that, but I don't think it lends to the most excellent player. He'll be solid though, just offensive pop here and there, and he'll have like a really dangerous chance every game.
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about James Haggins. I mean, I think James Haggins has a pretty low floor, to be honest, in the NHL, but he's still so talented. Like, he's just got so much to offer, and like if he hits, he's going to be sick. Martone not in the top 4. Time to grab the pitchforks. Fair. Yeah. I mean, hey, I've got a game of Martone to do in the next week, so we'll see how things look there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's with him. Just a couple of other guys have been a little bit, well, I guess there's only one since he's at 5 for me, but like Victor Eklund in Sweden at a pro level has been, oh my God, he's been so good. Who do you think is driving your garden more when you watch, Eklund or Frondell? Well, there you go. The data that I have, most of the games from Frondell are in the pro league, and it is unequivocally Eklund. But I think Frondell plays just a very different style of play that still moves things positively. It's just the numbers aren't there as much as it is for Eklund.
Yeah, but also Eklund has NHL bloodlines, which
that's true as well. Yeah, where's Frondell's NHL brother, right? Like, come on.
See, it's funny. I don't feel like anybody talks about that when it comes to siblings, but if it's their dad, okay.
Yeah.
Or their uncle even.
Yeah. Devon Taves is a really good defensive player. Yeah, I agree. Devon Taves, really, really good defensive player. Chris Tanev is another good one. But again, these guys are generating offense as well, right? Like, they're some of the more productive defensemen in the league. So, like,
well, not Chris Tanev, to be fair.
Like, but like for a time he was like, he wasn't like 12 points a season, right? Like, you know what I mean? you know, like if you're putting up 30 or 40 points as a defenseman, that's a pretty good season offensively, especially if you're not on power play.
I'd throw Charlie McAvoy in that as well. Like, just not necessarily the most flashy offense, but he's got points because he's just so good defensively.
Yeah, and he's a hell of a skater. Anyway, do you think OEL is one of the best defensemen the Leafs have had?
No, I'm bringing out my pitchfork on you. How, bro? We've had Jake Muzzin on this team, and you're acting like OEL's in the conversation. No,
you triggered lib. You triggered lib. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Look, I always overreact because it's funny. Okay, people want me to overreact, and I'm naturally good at it. So keep firing away with questions like that because I will react to it.
Right.
I'm a sucker.
Someone said, where do you have Anton Frondel ranked? And I will tell you, I have him at 10 now. No, 11. No, yeah, 10. So a little higher than I had him in December. I just think he's super projectable. We talked about him ad infinitum today. That's the word of the day. The phrase of the day. Ad infinitum.
You gonna ever use that word ever again outside of the stream?
Yes, probably.
Okay.
Someone mentions Daniil Imurzen as a free agent, but he's not college. But I agree. I love Daniil Imurzen. He could get a contract for sure. Opinion on Václav Nestrasil? Big, raw, lanky boy with a bit of an edge to him. I like him.
Great name.
I haven't seen him in a while. It's about time I do again, but he's a good one. He's a good player. Or could be a very good player, I should say. Could be. But he brings a lot of good tools to the table. Do you think it's necessary for an NHL team to do a full tear down rebuild to have sustained success in the NHL playoffs? I'm a fan of the Calgary Flames. I'm a fan of the Calgary Flames. Fans find it hard to see a path forward. I think you don't have to.
Yep.
Personally, I don't think you need to have super, super high draft picks all the time to figure out a way to be good. You know, like I think that I think that the dividing line between the best of the best in the draft most years, not every year, but especially if you're not drafting like first overall, the best of the best between the next of the rest of the top 10, if you do your homework, I don't think is very big. If you're smart and you do things creatively, like, you could really capitalize. I think that what is important is if you are sort of retooling on the fly and everything, your focus shouldn't be on let's make the team bad and draft really high, but let's trade some guys that aren't going to be here in a few years, get some second round draft picks and swing big on our second round draft
picks. Or firsts, because that's what Calgary's done.
Or firsts. Yeah, either one, right? But like, you don't need to be like, our first round pick needs to be third overall, right? That shouldn't be like, if it were me, my thing would be, no, every year we're going to try to win games because that's the culture that I want, right? You're supposed to be winning.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, then okay, if you know, it depends on expectations, but like, you're going to try. And the expectation from there becomes, okay, let's trim off some of the older guys, some of the guys that just realistically won't be here long term, that other teams will be interested in, and then you end up with a bunch of picks in the first couple rounds. You can do damage. You can do some real damage with those picks if you do your homework. Every year, that's the case, right? Like every year. Like team scouching, for example, is the the page is broken, but it's like the number 3 or 4 team in
prospect pool thing.
Yeah, in the prospect pool thing that I have.
It's 2 behind Seattle, I'm pretty sure.
Is it? It was for a while, but I think it's 4. I think me, Anaheim, San Jose, and Seattle are all crowded at the top. And I draft with Toronto's picks. So Toronto drafted in the first round. Well, the one guy they drafted died, and another one is Ben Danford, and another one is Easton Cowan, and I've gone different directions from those guys. But anyway, regardless,
they also traded back away from Brad Lambert.
We don't need to talk about that.
My soul, it's crushed.
Dude, Brad Lambert on the Toronto Maple Leafs.
It's exactly what they need.
It's exactly what they need.
Well,
but
they need a right hand or right side defenseman not named Oliver Ekman-Larsson in the top 4.
Yep. Okay. Let's keep it moving here because we are past 4:00. But the answer is I don't think you need to do a full-time rebuild at all. We might see McQueen go to someone with multiple picks. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's going to be an NHL team that pulls the trigger on him pretty quick. More times than not, full teardowns have a full psychological effect. I agree. I think it just is not the right way to go. A lot of talk about goal differential with Saginaw. We know we did this on Tuesday. Every year they say it's a weak draft, but the night before the draft, when they really have a lot of tape to watch, everyone gets hyped. This whole year ahead of time is bull. I mean, it is. I agree on one hand, but two, this is why I don't really talk about the quality of a draft beforehand anyway. Like, a year is a long time for players to get better. This season, even, I think that the play of a lot of these guys has gotten a lot better in the last 3 months than it was in the first 3 months, or October, November, maybe December. But like January, February, since the World Junior, there's been a lot of guys where I'm like, oh, okay, they got their legs under them. They're going. I see more of what they bring to the table. And there's more guys that I'm really excited about. But this year, I think, does open up really fast, and it then drops off pretty quick past 20. And the guys that I have past 20 or 25 are guys, maybe 25, are guys where I'm like, I just like you. I'll take a swing on you, stash you away for 5 years and see what you get. And there could be something there, right?
What's in the box?
What's in the box? Exactly, right? Like, just make educated bets and see what happens. Who got overglazed more for a four goal performance, McQueen or Paling? Probably Paling, because it was Montreal Canadiens and on against the Toronto Maple Leafs and in the NHL. I think that definitely Paling.
Pales in comparison.
If Eklund played in the SHL this year, do you think he gets the playing time he might deserve? He might even benefit from having playoff playing time in Hockey Allsvenskan. I agree. I think playing in the second division is a good place for a player like him to be. I think he probably would earn minutes in the SHL. Like, I feel like he's got the speed and the pace and the physical intensity in his game to do it. And I think he'd be good at it. Like, I've been watching some guys in the SHL that are draft eligibles that nobody's talking about. Guys like Michael Sverchek, Leo Sundqvist, Gustav Hillstrom.
Man, you mention Michael Sverchek every day, don't you?
Because he's sick. He's sick.
You're allowed to. I'm just making the observation.
And him in the SHL, like, if he and I think he belongs there. I think, and if he belongs there, then a guy like Eklund probably could hang as well. I know Kevin Ball is not a prospect anymore, but do you think he has more to give? Probably not. I've never been a huge Kevin Ball guy. I feel bad for guys like Seth Jones who have had the rug pulled out from under him when KD decided to tear it down in Chicago. I mean, I agree. I think there's talk that they're going to try to trade him. And yeah, I think that that's kind of the writings on the wall for him there. Speaking of drafts beforehand, thoughts on the 2026 and 27 draft? They're elite, the best draft ever. This year has a lot of really interesting guys, but it feels like every single one has an asterisk next to it. There is a lot of that. I think there is a lot of guys where it's like, but this is what I mean when I talk about players. It's like they'll bring things to the game and there's other things that they won't, and that's okay. It's just a matter of like finding the strengths and finding the weaknesses and balancing them and valuing them properly and just being aware of what you're getting in a player and just going, you know what, like, let's see how far we can take this guy because we like him. We think he brings this and this and this. So yeah, I think every single player, I would argue, this in any draft really has an asterisk next to their name. Even a Connor Bedard. Like, I watched a Connor Bedard in his draft year and I went, there are things in his game where I'm like, well, yeah, he'll be a great NHL player, but nobody's perfect. You know, you could highlight certain things and go, yep, this will need work. And in a way, I think we're seeing
unless your name is William Nylander, then you can do no wrong.
Right. If you're William Nylander, you're the best player that ever has lived ever.
You did miss one high floor prospect that should go late first, and I think your answer is Caleb Desnoyers.
Yeah, exactly.
But he won't actually go late first.
No. McQueen could be Eric Lindros scout. McQueen could be Eric Lindros, or he could have an injured career. Might as well bet on the Eric Lindros thing. Hey, again, if you want to do that at 5th overall, again, like if I'm Columbus last year and you wanted to put your money on Caden Lindstrom instead of an Ivan Demidov, by all means, you can do that. But if I'm the Montreal Canadiens, I'm going, well, thanks for making that decision easy. This is it for us, right? Like, if McQueen goes 5 and Desnoyers goes 4, I mean, it makes my life really hard because then I go, do I want Eklund or do I want Martone? I would lean Eklund there, but like, that makes it tough. But I think that's the kind of thing that could be possible. But I think there are NHL teams out there in that range that are going to be pulling their hair out at the idea of where to take McQueen because they have a really high pick. With hindsight, knowing how the drafts would turn out for the Habs, would you rather have picked a Michkov or Leonard over Reinbacher in the 2023 draft? I probably would have gone Michkov. Like, having Michkov and Demidov on the same team would have been so dumb. So dumb. Like, you could make an argument maybe for Ryan Leonard, but I do like Reinbacher. I think if you're Montreal, like a Michkov there, like Montreal, if you had drafted Logan Cooley, Matvey Michkov, and Ivan Demidov, I think
While
things
still
look
drafting Lane Hudson.
while still drafting Lane Hudson, like that team is terrifying. So, you're going to get a player in Reinbacher. You have a player in Slavkovsky,
Lane
and
Hudson
you have
rocks.
Demidov. Lane Hudson rocks. Like you have 50% of that. So that's not bad. But yeah, for me, Michkov was the guy. And I mean, maybe he told Montreal he didn't want to play there, which totally changes the equation. But yeah, anyway, really, really good player. But I do like Reinbacher, and I see him and Leonard as potentially bringing somewhat similar value, just very different, different styles of play. But anyway,
Alrighty.
that's going to be it. Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. This was a lot of fun. Again, thank you to Scott for coming on, Scott Wheeler. If you're not aware of him, just go on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever your favorite social media platform is and follow him. He's a good dude.
Or go back to the
Thank him.
beginning of the stream and watch
Or
it.
go back to the beginning of the stream and watch it again. Yeah, it was a good time. We had a lot of fun. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Go Canada, go. AJ, how much does Canada win by tonight, and who's the hero of the night for you?
Who cares? Leafs for cup. Go Leafs, go. Nah.
Okay.
I should end it on that, but you know what? I have no clue. And I'm no, okay. I've got my answer. ADHD brain. It's Connor McDavid. McDaddy's bringing it home.
Yeah, I think it's McDavid's night. McDavid needs a Canadian jersey hero moment, and I think I go McDavid. Yep,
Connor McDavid.
Yep. I'm with you. I want to see it. I want it so bad. Anyway, thanks for joining us. This was a lot of fun. We'll see you Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, thanks to Scott for coming on. And again, all our sponsors of the show are in the description. So if you want to help us out, you can definitely do that. Check out scouching.ca and get a subscription there. That helps us out even more. So thank you very much. And we'll see you Monday night, everyone. And have a good one.
Go Leafs, go.
Enjoy the game.
Go Leafs, go. You're not allowed to say things before
Enjoy
I get the
game.
last word. Go Leafs, go.